Well, I think the EWI is still one of the most fascinating electronic instruments out there today. Just the way it feels so responsive and natural, and of course the vast array of possibilities that it opens up as a musician. You know, coming from saxophone, and then suddenly I have all this range to play on. I have all these different instruments that I can connect to, and each instrument will take me to another place. So it just opens up all these doorways to other worlds. So it got me into sound production, into sound editing, and in general just the functionality of how I play in a band. I mean, in some projects I can play the bass through the EWI, and I then move to playing the lead, and then playing some harmony layers maybe with the intervals, and some ambient layers with tons of effects. So just the different positions it puts me as a player, as someone who performs the music. It's more of the thinking of a music producer, and it all started for me through the EWI, just getting into all these areas in music, and to me it's just like a life-changing instrument. So I would say my first EWI rig was connecting to Logic's ES2 synth, and I started messing around with the different waveforms there. So I had a basic saw wave sound, basic square wave sound, with some effects. That was my first steps into sound editing and synthesis, and I learned a lot with that. And honestly, I think it's a pretty good sounding synth. And I also did my first recording on that. So this is how I got started. My approach, I would say, to playing the EWI is to try to use the fact that it's such an unexplored territory, relatively. I mean, to instrument like a saxophone with all this tradition and a way of teaching it. So coming to the EWI, you have all these tons of possibilities open for you. And when I just got into it, I was trying to think, all right, how can I explore it in my own way, in my own pace? And so I did, and I still feel like it's all the time. It's just a journey, getting into more instruments, more techniques of playing that can actually later on, I know that for me they also influenced my saxophone playing. Just finding these different kinds of phrasing that are pretty much possible only on the EWI, with like jumping between octaves or just general approach to the usage of the sound that specific sound that I'm playing on. So my approach would be to try to think instinctively about where a specific sound takes you, and try to connect to that notion, and just try to perfect your own form of playing through that fairly unsearched territory with that instrument. I think one of my first encounters with jazz music was listening to EWI when my first teacher, I think I was like 13, my first teacher played to me It's Been Real by Michael Brecker with that EWI and violin opening. Instantly it took me by storm. I always had EWI in my mind, and then years later picking it up, I was surprised to how many different directions in music it could take me. It opened up my love for rock and roll and metal music back again. So I would just, at first when I picked it up, I would put some distortion effect on and would play those cool bass lines from Rage Against the Machine, for example. And from then, and from there, just listening to a Pat Metheny solo that I love, that he plays on that MIDI guitar, and then also to all my life to guitar playing, for example, and then John Scofield of course, and Bill Frisell definitely influenced me on some also melody playing, but also ambient kind of synth playing. So all these are my inspirations, alongside just great improvisers like Chick Corea, even in the aspect of like him as a composer and the functionality of what I can achieve with playing the EWI while playing this kind of music, and just in general great improvisers. Again, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, Pat Metheny, Michael Brecker, of course, not only on the EWI but also on the sax, also his whole essence as a total musician. And again, some influences from the ethnic world, some my own fusion, hearing, for example, a sitar and creating some sound that would create that blend for me of blending into some kind of music, sounding like a electronic kind of sitar or something like that. All these can deeply affect me, and I would say, just in general, these are my inspirations. There are many, it can be from Radiohead soundscaping to actual improvisation by Keith Jarrett, and all this gets in on the EWI because it's so broad and the possibilities are so like there's so many possibilities and so many things that you can sound like, and so much imagination that you can use while creating those sounds. I'm not a big expert on trying all the new wind instruments that are coming out, but I did see some kind of a trend that new instruments tend to try to more imitate maybe like other acoustic instruments, and I personally think it's cool in some situations, but generally I think the EWI should actually be used for exploring new territories, like use the side of sound synthesis with it, creating sounds that do not exist anymore. And I think the market should appeal to those real musicians who are searching for a sound, to create new sounds with the EWI. There are definitely very good plugins to imitate actual instruments, and they are great and they are useful, and you can combine between them and synths. You can create a lot of artistic stuff with those, but just the general thinking should be not to try to imitate something that exists, but more appeal to the creative side of it. And I think the companies should also, I personally think that the companies should also embrace that kind of thinking and aim there. Usually I use like kind of a combination between different sound sources. So I have some hardware synthesizers. All the time I mess around with the internal EWI sounds, and I use different kind of VSTs. And what I usually do, I combine them together, put them through some effects, and just like create the leveling about the balance, their internal balance between them, to create a new sound. So I like to use the Mofo synth for the hardware analog input. It warms up the sound. I like to combine it with the internal EWI sounds, and also a VST that I use often is Omnisphere. Very rich, very powerful synth, and also it's a sample library is great. So I often find my own combinations there, putting it through some of my effects like analog delay, some pitch shifter, overdrive, yeah, I've been traveling quite a lot with this setup. This is my current EWI rig. Well, this is actually a good question. I mean, there's functionality in the terms of the controller itself, and I can, for example, on the buttons on, I play the EWI 4000S, so the buttons on my right hand, I can trigger another layer. I personally, in recent years, I use Ableton, but it's also, before that I used Mainstage. It's possible on both to assign it to some to activate some layer. Or I love using the program change of the EWI, pressing that screw above the ground plate, then playing a note, and immediately it changes the sound. Very useful for live playing. And just in general, like I said before, in functionality of playing, it's endless. It just takes me, I can play ambient music with tons of effect. I can play the bass. Each one of these will take its own time to shape and know what works, but I think it's fascinating. I think that you can beat tons of different players, different essences in one using this instrument. I would say yes and no. I mean, I would say that the EWI is similar to many wind instruments. It can be the flute, can be saxophone with its front panel with the fingering. But other than that, I would say it's an instrument on its own. I mean, the wheels are definitely something that I've never seen before playing it. Also, the whole way of just like the touch of the EWI is different. And I love it about it because it's an actual instrument of its own. People ask me often, right, is that an electronic saxophone? I'm sure many of you know that question. And I say no. It's an instrument, it's an actual instrument, and it should be approached, again, it should be approached as an instrument with its own possibilities, its own way of playing and creating music that could never be created on the saxophone. I would say both. I mean, I would say that there's no like bad and good. There are amazing instruments in both sides. I mean, like I said before, I love to combine between them even. So I have a hardware synth. I combine it into a mixer with a VST synth or sample, and just create a new sound. I would say sometimes maybe on the road it's easier to take like a hardware synth, but and on the like in my home studio to work with VSTs, but not only. I mean, there are really, the VST world has been developing so much. There's so many things that you can do, and I just can't ignore that. I have to check out what's happening, you know, and combine it with some hardware equipment that I have, and also on that term get introduced to more hardware equipment that there's all the time great stuff coming out, and I would say definitely both. The official reason will be that the slime is getting down from the mouth down the EWI and can get into the electronic, all those circuits inside the EWI. But my actual reason, because it never happened to me this way, so my actual reason is just paying some kind of tribute to Michael Brecker, like my own personal tribute to Michael Brecker, and to just like the tradition of EWI and the community of EWI, which I love being part of.